The sun was beginning to rise over the small village of Alvarez, bathing the stone houses in a golden light that promised a peaceful Sunday. The chapel, with its white walls and clay roof, was packed with worshippers. The scent of incense hung in the air, mixed with the soft sound of prayers echoing between the walls. Father Lorenzo, a man of unshakable faith, was preparing for his sermon, his serene countenance reflecting the peace of the moment. "Dear brothers and sisters," Lorenzo began, his deep voice resonating in the chapel, "today we gather to celebrate God's goodness and the hope He brings to each one of us." Among those present, Isabella, a young woman with curly hair and sparkling eyes, was listening attentively. Next to her, old Domenico, with his trembling hands and white beard, nodded softly, as if each of the priest's words were a balm for his weary soul. The Mass went on its way, and the villagers shared looks of understanding and unity. However, amidst the tranquility, a whisper of unease began to form in the air. The black crow, a rare and almost mythical presence in the village, suddenly appeared, flying in frantic circles before storming into the chapel. The bird, with its wide wings and dark plumage, seemed to be an omen of something dark, and the murmuring among the faithful intensified. "Look! What is that?" exclaimed a woman in the front row, while the children shrank into their seats, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity. The crow, undeterred, abruptly landed on the statue of Mary, its unsettling presence contrasting with the serenity of the sacred image. "It's a sign, a warning," whispered Domenico, his gaze fixed on the bird. Father Lorenzo, sensing the growing agitation, raised his hands in a gesture of calm. "Brothers and sisters, fear not. This bird may be a messenger from God." But his words rang hollow amid the commotion. The crow, emitting a shrill and disturbing caw, seemed oblivious to the priest's presence, as if on a mission of its own. The villagers' gazes crossed between disbelief and fear. What could that apparition mean? "Maybe he's here to warn us about something," Isabella suggested, her voice shaky but firm. "The village of Alvarez has always had its legends, and crows never appear without reason." Domenico agreed, his wrinkles deepening as he reflected on the tales of his youth. "They say they carry messages from beyond, or even doom. We need to pay attention." The tension in the chapel grew, each minute dragging by as if time had slowed down. The crow continued to cry out, and the image of Mary seemed somehow almost sad, as if she knew a secret that everyone was ignoring. Father Lorenzo, feeling the need to act, slowly approached the statue, his hands outstretched in a gesture of peace. "O creature of God, don't come and frighten us. If you have a message, let it be revealed," he said, his voice echoing with a reverberation of authority. For a brief moment, the crow stopped squawking, its bright eyes fixed on the priest, as if assessing the sincerity of his intentions. But soon, the bird resumed its agitation, and a new murmur spread among the faithful. "What does he want? What does it mean for us?" The questions multiplied, and the atmosphere of tranquility quickly dissipated, giving way to a climate of uncertainty and fear. The chapel, once a sanctuary of peace, had become a space full of omens. The villagers, torn between fear and curiosity, could not ignore what was before their eyes. The crow, in its restlessness, had become a symbol of something greater, a message that had yet to be deciphered. And as the day wore on, the feeling that something dark was approaching began to settle in the hearts of the residents of Alvarez. In the days that followed the raven's disturbing appearance, the atmosphere in Alvarez had become heavy and oppressive. The villagers, who used to gather to share laughter and stories at dusk, now met in small groups, exchanging worried glances and whispers about what might be happening. A climate of despair had set in, and signs of doom were visible on every corner of the village. One Tuesday morning, Isabella, a young woman with dark hair and curious eyes, was walking through the central square. She noticed that old Domenico's cows were thinner than usual, and the chicks that used to run happily under the villagers' feet were now standing still, looking lost. "Domenico, what's happening to your animals?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Old Domenico, with his deep wrinkles and trembling voice, replied, "I don't know, my child. They're getting sick, and I can't understand why. It started right after that mass. That crow. What did he bring for us?" Isabella shook her head, remembering Father Lorenzo's words during the sermon. "Maybe it's a sign, Domenico. Something isn't right. We need to pull together and find out what's going on." Meanwhile, at Donna Maria's house, the tomato harvest, which should have been abundant, was devastated by an unknown plague. The woman, who until then had been known for her ability to grow the best vegetables in the region, watched the dry and withered plants with tears in her eyes. "What's happening, my God?" she cried, clutching her rosary tightly. "It's as if the earth is abandoning us." News of misfortune continued to spread through the village. During the community council meeting, Isabella stood up, determined to speak out. "Guys, we need to consider the possibility that all this is linked to the raven and that statue of Mary. What else could cause such a terrible sequence of events?" Murmurs of agreement and suspicion filled the room. "We can't just blame a bird, Isabella," said one of the elders with a skeptical look on his face. "But we can't ignore the fact that the statue was placed there by someone. We need to investigate." Father Lorenzo, who was watching the discussion attentively, raised his hand in a gesture of calm. "Let me speak. I too feel that there is something wrong, but before we draw conclusions, we need to understand the origin of the statue. There may be secrets that have never been revealed." After the meeting, Lorenzo decided to consult the village elders who, with their long memories and wise eyes, might have information about the mysterious statue. He went to the house of Donna Elvira, the oldest woman in the village, known for her wisdom and stories of the past. When he arrived, he found her sitting in her rocking chair, looking far away. "Elvira, do you know anything about the statue of Mary?" asked Lorenzo, anxiety in his voice. She looked at him, her eyes shining with hidden knowledge. "Ah, my son, the statue. It was donated to this church by someone who preferred to remain anonymous. But a long time ago, when my grandmother was young, there were rumors that an evil presence had been banished from the village. It was said that the statue held something important, a secret that had to be kept." Lorenzo's heart raced. What if that secret is connected to what we're facing now? "Only time will tell," replied Donna Elvira, looking out of the window as if she saw something beyond the horizon. "But be careful, Lorenzo. What was sealed in the past can manifest itself again if we're not careful." With those words, Lorenzo left the house, determined to investigate further. Meanwhile, the villagers were preparing to face the coming storm, not only in the sky, but also within their hearts. The feeling that something dark was lurking was palpable, and the village seemed to be coming together not just out of faith, but out of the need to uncover the truth hidden beneath the surface. The soft afternoon light filtered through the chapel window, illuminating the statue of Mary, which, until then, had seemed to be a symbol of protection for all the residents of Alvarez village. However, the atmosphere was filled with unease after the revelation of the raven and the strange events that followed. Father Lorenzo, with a worried look on his face, had called Domenico and Isabella to investigate further. "Let's check the base of that statue," suggested the priest, his voice firm but filled with apprehension. "There may be something that can help us understand this situation." Domenico, a wise old man from the village, nodded, his blue eyes shining with the curiosity and fear that permeated the community. Isabella, the determined young woman, felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The history of the village was at stake, and she was willing to find out the truth. As they approached the base of the statue, Lorenzo crouched down, observing the carved details. The wood was aged, but there was something peculiar about it. A small crack in the structure caught his eye. He ran his fingers over the crack while the others watched in silence. "Look here!" he exclaimed, drawing the attention of Domenico and Isabella. "It looks like there's a hidden safe." With the help of Domenico, who used his strength to move the statue slightly, they revealed an opening that seemed to have been forgotten by time. Adrenaline coursed through Isabella's veins as she approached with a mixture of fear and anticipation. What were they about to discover? "Let's see what's inside," said Domenico, crouching down to take a closer look at the crack. It could be a message from the past. Lorenzo, with almost reverent care, began to remove a small object that was stuck in the crack. It was an old safe, covered in dust and with symbols that no one could identify. "I wonder what's in here," Isabella murmured, her heart beating faster. Lorenzo, using the key he had found in his own cell, opened the safe with a bang. Inside, yellowed papers were organized in an unpretentious way, but their importance was undeniable. The priest began to unfold the manuscripts, his eyes widening as the words revealed themselves. "These are accounts from a priest before me," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "He talks about an evil that was banished from the village many years ago. He says that the objects used in that exorcism were hidden in the statue of Mary to seal away the evil presence." Isabella and Domenico exchanged worried glances. The idea that an ancient evil could be lurking, waiting for the right moment to return, was terrifying. "That means the crow," began Isabella, but Lorenzo interrupted her. "Yes, the crow is a warning," said the priest, his countenance serious. "He's here to warn us of what's to come. We need to act." "What do we do now?" asked Domenico, his voice filled with urgency. "The only thing we can do is hold an exorcism ceremony," Lorenzo replied with determination. "We need to confront this evil before it fully manifests itself. The community needs to come together like never before." Isabella felt a surge of responsibility. It was time to gather the villagers and prepare them for what was to come. The thought of facing an ancient evil was terrifying, but the village's faith and unity could be its greatest strength. "Let's warn everyone," said Isabella resolutely. "We can't let fear take us over. We need courage." Domenico agreed, and together, the three of them began to plan how to bring the community together. Their loyalty and determination were palpable, and although the future was uncertain, they were ready to face whatever lurked in the shadows of Alvarez village. The raven, like a silent guardian, watched everything from a window as if it knew that the fate of the village was about to be decided. The sun was already hiding behind the mountains, giving way to a sky full of dark clouds that seemed to reflect the village's anxiety. In the chapel, the villagers crowded around, whispering prayers and exchanging apprehensive glances. Father Lorenzo, standing in front of the altar, was adjusting the ceremonial vestments, his expression determined, but concern shining in his eyes. The exorcism would be the last hope of a people who were seeing their lives fall apart. "May God protect us," murmured Isabella, holding Domenico's hand as he stood beside her. "We need to believe that the light will overcome the darkness." "We can't let fear rule our hearts," replied Domenico, his voice firm, although his body trembled slightly. "We're all in this together. Unity is our strength." The villagers had mostly arrived early. Some had lighted candles in their hands, others brought flowers to decorate the altar, while others were preparing to sing hymns. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable fear, as if the very air was impregnated with something sinister, which put them on alert. Suddenly, a roar echoed outside, and the storm that was brewing began to rage. The winds howled, making the chapel's windows shake. Father Lorenzo took a deep breath and gestured for silence. The voices fell silent, and the only sound was the howling of the wind, which seemed to challenge the tranquility of the ceremony. "Beloved brothers and sisters," Lorenzo began, his voice resonating with authority, "today we gather to face a shadow that hangs over our village. The arrival of the raven was no accident. He has warned us of an evil that has long been hidden. The villagers listened attentively, some with tears in their eyes, others with expressions of resignation. The memory of recent misfortunes, of lost crops and sick animals, hung over them like a dark cloud. With faith and courage, we invoke divine protection, Lorenzo continued, raising the cross that hung around his neck. May the light of God illuminate our paths and drive out the darkness that surrounds us. As he spoke, Isabella looked out of the window and saw the crow perched on a nearby branch, its eyes shining as if it understood the gravity of the situation. The bird seemed to be the only spectator aware of the battle that was about to take place. "Do you see that?" asked Domenico, noticing Isabella's gaze. "I think he knows more than we do." "Yes," replied Isabella. "He's part of it. I feel he's here to guide us." The storm intensified, and the gusts of wind began to be accompanied by lightning that lit up the interior of the chapel, casting distorted shadows on the walls. Father Lorenzo began to chant the prayers of exorcism, his voice clear and resonant, echoing among the faithful. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I cast you out. Leave this land and return no more," he cried, as the villagers joined in, repeating the words in unison, forming a chorus of faith. The chapel seemed to vibrate with the force of the words, and Lorenzo sensed that something was changing. The windows were shaking, and a cold feeling began to creep in, as if the darkness itself was trying to invade the sacred space. "Don't be afraid," shouted Lorenzo, raising the cross more firmly. "The light will always prevail." At that moment, a deafening crash made the walls of the chapel shake. The crow, which until then had been watching calmly, took flight and began flapping its wings furiously, as if responding to the priest's call. The villagers looked at the bird, and a wave of hope went through the crowd. "He's with us!" exclaimed Isabella, feeling a new cheer rise up inside her. "He's our protector!" The winds howled outside, and the voices of the villagers mingled with the clamor of the storm, creating a symphony of faith and determination. Father Lorenzo continued his invocation, feeling the energy of the community uniting in a single purpose, to drive out the evil that threatened the peace of Alvarez. "May this evil depart from us. May Mary's blessing be with us." Lorenzo's voice rang out, and as he spoke, an intense light illuminated the chapel, making everyone feel enveloped in a protective light. The silence that settled over the chapel after the exorcism ceremony was almost palpable. The last echoes of Father Lorenzo's prayers resounded in his thoughts as he watched the raven, now tranquil above the window, as if it were fulfilling a mission that transcended human understanding. The villagers, still in a state of grace, couldn't help but stare at the black bird, a symbol that had previously evoked fear, but which, at that moment, seemed to be a guardian. "Look!" exclaimed Isabella, pointing at the crow. "He's watching us, as if he knows that everything will be all right now." Domenico, who was standing next to her, nodded. "Yes, it looks like he's brought peace back to our village. I never thought a crow could be a sign of protection." Domenico's words echoed among the villagers, who began to gather in small groups, murmuring about the victory they had won together. The storm, which had previously been roaring outside, was now dissipating, as if nature itself was celebrating the change of spiritual climate in the chapel. "God heard our prayers," said an older woman with tears in her eyes. "Faith has united us, and now we can live in peace again." Father Lorenzo, satisfied with what he had witnessed, couldn't help but feel a warmth in his heart. He walked over to the altar, where the statue of Mary stood, serene and imposing. "Let us thank Mary for her protection and for guiding us in this moment of darkness," he announced, raising his voice so that everyone could hear him. "We must not forget that the unity of our community was the key to warding off evil." The villagers responded in unison. "Amen!" The sound reverberated off. The silence that settled over the chapel after the exorcism ceremony was almost palpable. The last echoes of Father Lorenzo's prayers resounded in his thoughts as he watched the raven, now tranquil above the window, as if it were fulfilling a mission that transcended human understanding. The villagers, still in a state of grace, couldn't help but stare at the black bird, a symbol that had previously evoked fear, but which, at that moment, seemed to be a guardian. "Look!" exclaimed Isabella, pointing at the crow. "He's watching us, as if he knows that everything will be all right now." Domenico, who was standing next to her, nodded. "Yes, it looks like he's brought peace back to our village. I never thought a crow could be a sign of protection." Domenico's words echoed among the villagers, who began to gather in small groups, murmuring about the victory they had won together. The storm, which had previously been roaring outside, was now dissipating, as if nature itself was celebrating the change of spiritual climate in the chapel. "God heard our prayers," said an older woman with tears in her eyes. "Faith has united us, and now we can live in peace again." Father Lorenzo, satisfied with what he had witnessed, couldn't help but feel a warmth in his heart. He walked over to the altar, where the statue of Mary stood, serene and imposing. "Let us thank Mary for her protection and for guiding us in this moment of darkness," he announced, raising his voice so that everyone could hear him. "Whatever you have to tell me, do it now," Lorenzo ordered, feeling his heart racing. But the crow just flapped its wings and flew off into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. The villagers began to return, bringing food and laughter, but Lorenzo couldn't help feeling that something more was to come. He looked up at the sky, which was now beginning to lighten, and made a silent promise. He would be prepared for whatever lay ahead. The unity of the community had been strong, but he knew that the real battle was often fought within hearts, and there, he would prepare himself to face any shadow that tried to return to Alvarez village. The days that followed the exorcism ceremony brought an apparent calm to Alvarez village, but the feeling that something remained lurking in the air did not dissipate. Isabella, a determined and curious young woman, began to frequent the chapel more often, sensing that there was something more to be discovered. In a forgotten corner, behind some candles, she found a dusty diary. The pages were yellowed by time, but the handwriting was clear and legible. "This diary belonged to the priest who banished evil from the village," she murmured, as she examined the book's cover. Excitement enveloped her, and curiosity prevented her from hesitating. She sat down on a bench in the chapel and began to read quietly, the soft echo of her words filling the sacred space. The pages revealed a story that Isabella could never have imagined. The priest spoke about an evil presence that had been imprisoned in the statue of Mary, an entity that, if released, would bring ruin to the community. "The raven," Isabella read to herself, "is the guardian of this prison. When the village is in danger, he will return to warn the villagers." With each line, the young woman's heart beat faster. Here was the answer to so many questions that plagued everyone. Reading it soon revealed that the evil presence was not completely sealed off. "I have been watching the village for generations," wrote the priest. "Its inhabitants must remain vigilant, for true evil could return at any moment." Isabella closed the diary, fear mingling with a new understanding. The raven that had frightened them so much was actually the messenger of protection. He was not a harbinger of doom, but a symbol of hope and warning. She soon decided to share her findings with Father Lorenzo. The next morning, Isabella found him in the chapel, still absorbed in his prayers. "Father, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling with anxiety. "I found a diary hidden in the chapel. It talks about the raven and the evil presence." The priest raised his head, his eyes showing interest. "A diary? What does it say, my child?" Isabella explained quickly, revealing the connection between the raven and the protection of the village. Lorenzo listened intently, his expression changing as she spoke. "This is something we need to investigate further," he said with a new determination. "We may have missed something important about the safety of our community." As they talked, The raven appeared again at the chapel window, watching them with a penetrating gaze. Isabella and Lorenzo exchanged meaningful glances. "He's watching us," murmured Isabella, her heart racing at the possibility that the bird wasn't just a messenger, but something even deeper. That night, while the village slept under a starry sky, the crow landed on the chapel font. A supernatural glow enveloped it, and Isabella, who couldn't sleep, went out to see what was happening. To her surprise and amazement, the crow began to transform before her eyes. The feathers faded, and in their place, an old man appeared, with a serene countenance but carrying an aura of ancient wisdom. Isabella stood paralyzed, her mouth open in astonishment. "You? Who are you?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Don't be afraid, my child," replied the man, his voice soft and reverent. "I am the spirit of the priest who trapped evil in the statue. The raven is my way of protecting you." He paused as if weighing his words. "The village faces new challenges, and it is my duty to warn you. The real evil is yet to come." Isabella, still incredulous, whispered, "What should we do?" "What you've always done. Stick together. Your faith and courage will be the key to facing what is to come," said the priest, his expression serious but full of hope. "Remember, the real fight is not just against external forces, but within each one of you. Prepare yourselves, for darkness is approaching." The young woman felt the gravity of his words. With a new understanding of her mission, she knew that the village needed to unite more than ever. "We'll be ready," Isabella promised, determined. And with that, the priest's spirit vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Isabella with a sense of urgency and hope. The small village of Alvarez would prepare for what was to come, armed with restored faith and renewed courage.